The death of Sushant Singh Rajput, a young, successful actor, has once again forced people to acknowledge the challenge of mental health, albeit grudgingly. The commentary on Rajput's suicide unfortunately gives us a voyeuristic account of his life and what could have led him to his end without addressing the real issue. According to a WHO study, 6.5% of the Indian population suffers from some form of serious mental disorder. 10.9 per 1 lakh is the average suicide rate in India, with a majority of people who commit suicide below the age of 44. Now, the COVID-related lockdown has also led to a rise in mental health issues. A survey conducted by the Indian Psychiatry Society has noted an increase in the number of people reporting mental health issues, possibly due to the restrictions on social engagement, jobs and financial insecurities, and the fear of the disease itself. So today, we bring together individuals who have suffered personally, but have also chosen to share their stories publicly to help destigmatize mental health issues and mainstream solutions to address this challenge. Joining us now on the CNBC-TV18 Conversations is Milind Deora, Congress leader and former union minister, who has come out in public and spoken about his own challenges and his coping mechanism to deal with suicidal thoughts, a rare instance for a politician to do so. Also with us on the program, Radhika Gupta, the CEO of Edelweiss Asset Management, and Rachit Gupta of Sequoia Capital, both who have not shied away from talking about depression and their way of dealing with it in public. Milind, Radhika and Rachit, thanks very much for joining us here on CNBC TV18. You know, this is not an easy issue to go public with. And Milind, let me start by asking you, because you put out a tweet where you address the fact that you have been dealing with this issue that goes well back into your teens and then even as a member of parliament. When did you first acknowledge that this was a problem, that this was a disease that needed to be dealt with?
Well, you know, the first wave really hit me when I was in my teens, maybe at the age of 16 or 17. And it kind of hit me like a tsunami, like a ton of bricks. And I didn't really know what this really meant. I thought something was wrong with me when I was talking.
Trends as they develop. We get you all the buzz in the commodity market and help you connect commodity to the company. Let the biggest champions guide your investments. And find out.
It took me a while before I realized that this could be a result of perhaps a chemical imbalance in your brain, perhaps something you're born with. It could be hormonal. It could be a reaction to something, maybe some trauma that you've experienced, although frankly, I didn't. I had a great life till the age of 16 or 17 when I experienced this for the first time.
Yeah.
I later realized that it's no different from, stomach bug or fracturing your arm. Really, it's your brain ultimately is an organ as well.
Yeah.
And brain can have some kind of reactions to chemicals, external factors as any of your organs, behind your rib cage or below it can have. When that dawns on you, you realize it's basically a medical condition, and you need to treat it as a medical condition, just like you would with anything else. And I was fortunate in that I've never had to deal with it by medicating myself. I have a lot of close friends who've taken medications and have been prescribed medications by their doctors.
Okay.
But I did deal with it in many, many ways. And I don't think in the early days and in the first or second wave that I dealt with it in the way that I should have. But I later learned to deal with it far more scientifically and medically.
Okay.
And now I've learned to control it. I've learned essentially to live with it.
I'll get to the coping mechanism in just a second, but something that you said reminds me of what Rachit has posted. And Rachit, you spoke about your inability to deal with this. You were an entrepreneur and like many businesses, sometimes it doesn't work out, and that led to your dealing with depression and the consequences thereof. And I remember reading in your tweets that, to most people it would seem like, well, this is not really rational, but for you it was real. Now, how do you acknowledge what's going on with you before you start to address it, whether, that is through seeking professional help or through a support group?
I would say it was a pretty tough realization. Like Milind was saying, the first time you feel it, you don't really know what's happening with you. and it takes time for you to realize that it's not lack of energy or lack of motivation. There's something deeper. And the fact that most of us don't even know what depression is or means or what mental health issues are, it makes it really hard for us to self-diagnose. That being said, I think once you realize that despite your intention to actually move on and get better, if you're not able to, I think trying to get professional help is probably the biggest thing which ultimately helped me. But there was a process to get to that step as well. And in that intervening process, I think the love of family, friends, my partner, just being able to get mentors and support, basically the people around me really helped a lot. That was, I think, the biggest change.
That was the biggest change, to get people around you to rally behind you and help you cope with this. But Radhika, as Rachit was pointing out, and very often we sort of use these terms interchangeably almost, mental health and mental illness, and they're very, very specific and they're very different. If you look at, and I don't even know how many people know this, that India actually has a national mental health policy that was put into place in 2014. In fact, I think, Milind, it was during the UPA time that the discussions had started through a policy group on designing that policy, which finally came through in October of 2014. And mental health is, psychological distress, mental illness, deals with specific issues like OCD, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. And we very often use these interchangeably. But Radhika, what was your experience when you first addressed this issue?
So I have been, and I don't think we talk in India, forget about mental challenges, but even about failure. We are always taught that if you succeed, then this will happen and you'll go to IIT and this will happen. But we are very, very scared to acknowledge failure. I grew up with these challenges, and honestly, I have grappled with them till the age of 33. I think, particularly the physical challenges for me and the way you look, I think, particularly as a young woman, it's trying to go through. I had my own case, which I documented in a video, of wanting to jump off a 19th floor of a building in college at the age of 19, because it was the first real brush with failure, and I got the help I did. But at 33, when I decided to go public with the issues and talk about them in that video, The Girl with a Broken Neck, more than anything else, it set me free. And I've had thousands of people now, Shereen. I get about 2 letters a day with people going through very similar challenges, and they're from around the world. Someone is grappling with a bald patch on their head. Someone is grappling with running away from a small town. And they are all stories that need to be told. But for me, once I came out in the open and talked about it, the challenge actually became a strength.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point that you make, that while the process of coming out and speaking about it publicly is, traumatic, but perhaps at the end of it, when you do come out and speak about it, it provides you with some degree of acknowledgement, making the issue real, and then perhaps also seeking relief and help. But Milind, let's talk about that. There is, of course, the aspect of promoting mental health awareness, then the aspect of prevention, then the aspect of providing universal access to healthcare services, mental health care services, community participation. I mean, have you, in your experience, seen how these aspects have been addressed effectively? Where do you believe the deficits continue to lie that need to be addressed much more effectively?
Look, I think that the government can only do so much to address this issue. I mean, perhaps the government can in some way invest in counselors, give people access, perhaps insurance companies can do a little more here and there. But it really does come down to, destigmatizing the issue to start with. And the range goes really from, suicidal thoughts to self-doubt, and which is the most mild variation of this, really, of this disease, if you will. Everyone experiences self-doubt. Everyone experiences some form of anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. And that's pretty intense when you go through that. But even with self-doubt, which is like a sort of gateway to this disease, I think that's the stage at which you need to seek help. And I don't necessarily believe that, going to a counselor or a psychiatrist is the only way to do it, because every Indian will not have access to a psychiatrist. But I think what I've learned by talking to doctors is you just need someone to talk to. You just need someone to tell you that what you're experiencing is very normal. It's very common. It's not that you're alone in the world and you're the only one, because that's what happens when you feel that. You kind of feel like you're the only one experiencing that, and you keep asking yourself, what's wrong with me? And when you hear that you're not the only one experiencing it, it automatically gets destigmatized in your head, and then you're willing to sort of talk a little more to people, to your friends, to your family, even if people don't understand what you're going through. And that is also true in India, because I would agree with what the earlier spokesperson said, that India is pretty stigmatic towards mental health. I think that in a typical family, if someone says, I'm going through this, they'll say, "Bichara pagal ho gaya," and they'll say, "What's wrong with him or what's wrong with her?" And society will kind of like they'll ostracize you. They'll say something's wrong with your son or your daughter. So I really believe that at a family level, if we manage to spread awareness and we explain to people, that's how I understood it, and that's how I explain it to people, regardless of their economic strata or what part of society they're from. That this is no different from a stomach ailment or another organ ailment, and that the brain ultimately is an organ. That gives people hope, and that makes them realize that going through some bouts of depression, anxiety, self-doubt is very common. And at the same time, it also, on the positive side, it makes them realize that practicing yoga, meditation, eating healthy, exercising is good for you. It's good for your brain. It strengthens your brain. Your brain's immunity and your brain's performance. So I think mental health has to go beyond just the negative aspects. And I think if we as a government can spread awareness, I would say that's more than enough for any government to do. Because then I think people within their homes, their families, their societies, their friends, their ecosystem will fix it for themselves.
Yeah, you make a valid point there that, perhaps a large part of the government's efforts should be on promoting awareness and alleviating the pressures or the pain that come with the stigmatization associated with this. But Radhika, on that issue of stigmatization, because it does lead to discrimination, it leads to a feeling of being marginalized. Now, Milind was lucky he had friends and family who could rally around him. Similarly for Rachit, but not everyone will find access to support groups. What do you believe can be done? I mean, can we use technology, for instance? There are a lot of startups at this point in time trying to address this, setting up helplines, etc. Can we use technology much more effectively to try and provide this access, this shoulder that Milind was speaking of?
There's two things you can do, and this is ultimately a very human issue. Shereen, I believe that corporates can do, while Milind talked a lot about what governments can do, I think corporates also need to, through technology and otherwise, give a caring environment where people can talk about these issues. Now, if you have a minor neck pain, think of how much it troubles you the whole day. If you have and you're carrying this emotional stress, and 10% of your organization is carrying that stress, think of what is going on within the organization. And I think it starts by leaders coming out. I mean, someone like Milind coming out and talking about this. I think if leaders in the organization are coming, talking about their issues, coming in and talking about the fact that they are okay to seek help, that is the first step that we as corporate India can do.
But do you see that happening, Radhika? Do you see that happening? I mean, let's be honest about the fact that we thrive in a culture where success is measured by not wanting to seek help. Why success is measured by the fact that this is a versatile individual, they can juggle all sorts of balls all the time, and so seeking help is almost seen as a sign of weakness and a sign of failure. So do you really believe that culturally we need to first get past this business of the need to strive for perfection?
Absolutely. I mean, think of the two words you hear in corporates: zero error. I mean, who is a zero error individual? And lean, and I heard this in a corporate event a few weeks ago, lean, mean, machine. Do we want to become mean and machine as organizations? So I think you have to take that.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
It's not a lean, mean organization or a zero-error organization, because individuals are not zero error.
Yes, they are not zero error, and we need to build a culture of empathy as much as we need to build a culture of excellence. But Rachit, in your experience, how do we go about doing that? This is the reason why I've got the three of you together, is because you represent diverse walks of life, and you've all come out individually to share your story so that collectively there can be a change. But where do you believe we need to make that start?
You're saying it's a culture question, but also it's not easy to change culture. I think just the act of a few people in prominent positions coming out and talking about it is a small step in the way. But I think the broader ecosystem has just shown towards mental health issues of late. And like you said, right, like we always glorify success, but at least, in the universe I work in around early stage startups, the vast majority fail. Yeah. That's a reality, right? And our ecosystem needs how to handle failures. I think the core step of that is just empathy, right? Empathy of being able to talk to your peer or talk to somebody else who's going through this. You might or might not understand their problems, but at least being there to listen with an open mind, and then trying to help them in whatever way you can, either referring them to help, either helping them get back on their feet.
Yeah.
I think and if we as an individual take on the oath of one, trying to be empathetic, understanding of mental health, and at least in our circle of influence around the people we work with, the people we live at home, if we can increase acceptance, I think that would be a great first step to begin with.
But are you seeing that happen within the startup ecosystem, Rachit? You spoke about the fact that this is an ecosystem that deals with failure practically on an everyday basis. Are you seeing some avenue for conversations even around this issue to take place?
Definitely. I think the ecosystem is definitely matured. I think, that being said, all of us definitely need to do a much better job of how we handle this and how we help founders, employees, and investors deal with this. That being said, I think as more and more people have spent time in the ecosystem, tried and succeeded or tried and failed, I think the community has actually formed where founders actually lean on each other, both in good times and bad. And I think at least in the close circles, that has definitely helped a lot of the people I know personally. But I don't think there is yet a great public forum where it's acceptable and it's easy for people to come out about this and actually take the next step of getting help or getting back on their feet.
Milind, you were lucky that you were able to deal with the challenge largely by yourself without access to professional help or without needing medication. But, it may not be the same for many people. So this need to create a public forum, need to create support groups, perhaps CSR money going into setting up organizations, foundations that provide this sort of a service. Given the large numbers, and these are, the numbers that we're talking about are the reported numbers, I don't know what the unreported number could be. How do you believe we can institutionalize dealing with mental health issues?
Look, I actually differ with the gentleman who spoke before me. I think that collectively, governments, the private sector, influencers, entertainers, the media certainly, I really believe that the only way to do it is to change culture. And, when I put this tweet out yesterday and I was watching people comment on this young actor's alleged suicide, and I just very spontaneously put out these 5 points of mine, which I've actually shared with friends. And I just tweeted it out and I said something, and I in hindsight, it was a provocative tweet because I said, I've had suicidal thoughts as a teen, first as a teen and then as an MP as well. And that obviously got a lot of traction. And although 95% of the people who responded to me in private and publicly praised it, there were a few people who said, Milind, you're a politician and you shouldn't be saying that. And you shouldn't be admitting to that because unlike the private sector, which I've been a part of, and the politics is a really dog-eat-dog world. And no politician anywhere in the world is comfortable disclosing, health problems.
Yeah.
You see that in America, you see that in India. People are always cagey about saying they've got a disease, they've got a problem.
Yeah.
Until the last minute, even if they can't walk, even if they're dying, they would still want to show their party, they're part of a government, public at large, that we're still fit and fine. And I think that has to change. So
but what gave you the courage, Milind? You're absolutely right, because honestly, there is so much of this that we go through. You're judged for everything that you say or do, and not just as a politician, but in general. There is a culture, an all-pervasive culture of judging people, evaluating and assessing them practically every minute. What gave you the courage to come out and speak? Because as you point out, it could have consequences.
Yeah, and I'm hearing that from a lot of friends, and believe it or not, even from extended family members. At Milind, in politics, is it right for you to say and expose this vulnerability of yours? And my own view is that, when I got into politics at the age of 27, I had already been through a bout of very severe depression, where as I said, I had some really negative thoughts came to my mind, and I knew that I'm getting into a profession where, even though I won the first election that I contested, this is a profession where you're going to lose an election too. And when you lose an election and when you win an election, you suddenly go from 0 to 100 and 100 to 0. And I first asked myself, how will I deal with that when the time comes and I lose an election? And I learned and I realized in life that, it's far more important to be happy with what you have. And in some way you apply some form of a Buddhist philosophy wherein you try and be detached to as many things as possible. And that doesn't mean you don't have deep relationships. That doesn't mean you're not attached to your work.
Yeah.
But you try and tell yourself that the world is much bigger than, your career and whether you make X amount of money or Y amount of money, whether your colleagues like you or dislike you, whether you're popular or unpopular on Twitter. And when you begin to realize that, you actually come to terms with the fact that career gains and career losses mean very little in self-fulfillment. And it to me, it really comes down to, people always talk about, it's hard to live with a partner, it's hard to live with a parent, it's hard to live with, to work with your colleagues. I think in life, for most people, whether you're facing, depression or just self-doubt, the hardest thing in life is, learning to live with yourself. And if you can look in the mirror and be comfortable with who you are, for whatever good and bad is in you, and that to me is a short way of dealing with this.
Yeah.
It really stems from self-doubt. It's like, when you talk of when you talk of recreational drugs, people say that marijuana is like a gateway drug to other harder drugs. And I think self-doubt is a gateway sort of drug to depression and suicidal thoughts. And if you can really tell yourself, I really don't care what people think of me. I mean, that to me is, it's like today, I could have chosen, I was busy this morning when we agreed to do this show. And I could have chosen to sacrifice something else and shave, but I was just like, I'm busy and I can't do it. And ultimately what matters is what I'm saying and the content of my speech, not really the way I look and whether I have a beard or I don't. And if you can reach that level, I wouldn't claim to have reached that stage in life, that Zen-like phase, but if you can really get to that, and I think in that sense, meditation, yoga, other activities that enhance your mental health are extremely important. I think then you really tend to realize that, these career gains, ups and downs, personal losses here and there, don't really matter. What really matters is the basics. Can you live? Do you have a good ecosystem around you? Can you build deep relationships with your family, with your friends, with your loved ones? And if you can do that, frankly, I think you'll be happy in life. It is also linked, unfortunately, to happiness, which is very complicated. It's very unlike a normal illness. It has, it has psychoanalytical elements to it as well. But I do believe seeking help from friends, from family, from anyone, is the best way to deal with this and to cope with it.
Absolutely. I think that's an important point to make. But Rachit, to Milind's point of the journey from self-doubt to self-awareness, what was the hardest part of making that journey for you?
I think I would say accepting to myself that I wasn't okay because to the earlier points where we have a public persona and we show the world all the successes and all the good parts of life, but many people struggle silently and alone. I think accepting to yourself, and we are saying that it's okay to not be okay, truly accepting that, and then finding a base to actually go out, seek help, or at least have a conversation with somebody you trust or somebody you love, or even if it's a friend, and then slowly trying to unravel, the quote-unquote mess which you feel you've got yourself into.
Yeah.
But also knowing that, yes, if at any point of time before in your life, you were happy or you were normal, that there is a path to get back there again. I think that belief, if you can inculcate that, even though it's tough to see that light when you're in the dark times, I think that process of self-acceptance and then moving forward, I think that helps a lot.
Radhika, let me ask you, from your worst moment at 19 that you spoke of to the time that you started to feel like you had much more control of your own life at 33, what was the hardest part of making that journey, and what was the mechanism, the grid, the matrix that you relied on to be able to get there?
I think the hardest part was, as Rachit said, realizing that I'm not perfect and I don't have to be perfect, because you're brought up as a class topper, doing very well, and no class ever taught you how to cope with failure. So to tell myself that it's okay and that people will not think any less of me because I've failed, because I'm imperfect, that I don't have to check every box in life correctly. I think for me that is the biggest one, and the biggest learning and support has been finding a group of advisors. I say that every individual in life should have a personal advisory board. Beyond their friends and family, 4 or 5 people reach out to that give you the confidence and are there for you to talk to. I think that's the biggest strength that I've gotten.
Well, I think those are all wonderful ideas and thoughts, and I do hope that people who are watching this program will take away some of these thoughts that Milind, Rachit and Radhika have shared here with us. I particularly like the idea of having a personal advisory board, just people that you can lean on at times of distress, and also, we need to move away from stigmatizing failure, and we need to move away from stigmatizing seeking help. There's absolutely nothing wrong in seeking help and reaching out for professional or personal guidance. Milind Deora, Rachit and Radhika, really appreciate you joining us here on the CNBC-TV18 Conversations to share your stories as well as your learnings on as you've made these personal journeys. Thanks very much for joining us here on CNBC-TV18.